fact, in my opinion, it's kind of revenge to the people for not listening to their advice of the so-called evacuation, but in fact deportation, so that the people remained in their dwellings expecting for the Ukrainian troops to arrive. So that's their revenge. The enemies bombard the objects of civilian infrastructure, residential buildings. Tonight it was quite loud in Kherson, and we had reports of the occupiers targeting the apartment buildings, the apartment blocks, and there were strikes on Ostriv district and the wharf factory, and we got reports of the shellings of the residential areas and the center of the city. So far we don't have the official confirmed information about the casualties, so let's better wait for some confirmed details about the wounded and injured, or God forbid, dead. As of yesterday there were 3 casualties, 3 dead and more injured. As of today we don't have any figures. The situation is difficult. The demining works are in progress in Kherson. We had a report from emergency service that today the emergency service will be forced to take decision to blow up the building of the security service of Ukraine, as well as the building of the national police, because the number of mines retained by the occupiers does not allow to accomplish the demining process. Mr. Serhii, we still understand that the bombardment is going on, but at the same time the life is being renewed, resumed in Kherson. We see the first train to arrive to Kherson. All the important companies are coming back to the city. What's the situation with this? What is with the reestablishment of the governance in Kherson? Yes, that's true. Today is day 10 of the liberation. On 11th of November, Kherson was liberated from occupiers, and the city returns to life on a day-by-day basis. Still, there is no power supply. However, with the help of the international charity organizations who get involved in this process, and along with the help of all the corners and all the parts of our country who get involved in the help to Kherson, who provide diesel generators to provide the electric power supply, resumption of cell network operation. Locally, it reemerges in some districts of Kherson along with mobile internet. And it's true, the first train arrived on Saturday to Kherson. It's the train of unity. It was a charity action announced in the wake of the liberation of Kherson, and the train will be coming to Kherson every other day, and it's been announced that there is a bus connection to Kherson bus station and to Odessa is being resumed. So the city is kind of coming to its senses, is coming around after the destruction of the whole infrastructure by the occupier. Can you hear me? Yes, we're hearing you quite well. Currently, again, with the help of international organizations, and Kyiv gets involved in this process. We get the city of Kherson gets emergency aid, special machinery, because the occupiers, under the pressure of our armed forces, fled the city and pillaged everything that belonged to the community, including ambulances, special vehicles, and the property of the utility enterprises. And with the help of the whole Ukraine, everything is being renewed, rebuilt. The medical institutions restart working. The emergency medical help, emergency services resume their operations. All these institutions, they start from scratch, in fact, as well as the operation of the utility services. The humanitarian aid is being distributed not only in the central square of the city, as it was happening within the first days, but it's being handed to people in other districts of the city, because we have to understand that the citizens, not all of the citizens, can get to the Square of Liberty to get this humanitarian aid. Unfortunately, it's not yet quite scheduled and aligned, but we have to do our best so that every inhabitant of the city gets this humanitarian aid to the full extent. Meanwhile, it's being distributed in kind of chaotic way. There is a live queue, and people receive this humanitarian aid, and there are cases of fraud when some people receive a few packages of humanitarian aid, meanwhile others get none. But on a daily basis, we try to sort it out. But in general, the city is coming back to life. The trade network ATB came back. Ukrposhta post offices reopened. Oshad bank branches reopened, and now the power supply is about to resume. There is an announcement that in a week we will get the first power supply, and we will expect the water supply and heat supply to resume too, to cover the basic needs of the city. Mr. Serhii, recently the Minister for Reintegration of the temporarily occupied territories, Irina Vereshchuk, announced that there is evacuation from Kherson. Has it already started, and how many people use this option? Or do the inhabitants of Kherson wait for the return of the power supply and water supply and will stay in Kherson in their majority? Well, that's true. The voluntary evacuation is already announced from Kherson and from the adjacent areas on the right bank of Dnieper. In Berislav, there are free buses which can deliver people to Zaporizhia and Kryvyi Rih, where the humanitarian headquarters are deployed. Mykolaiv region also is engaged in help with evacuation, with voluntary evacuation from Kherson. Now it is announced, and the transport routes are being organized, but there is still no strict algorithm for this evacuation. Well, maybe it exists, but I haven't seen it so far. And I want to highlight there is a big problem with communication because of the absence of internet and mobile communication in Kherson. So, informing the inhabitants of Kherson as to the issue of humanitarian aid and evacuation, it's still difficult. I proposed for local administration to post some information boards so that people can see and understand what services they can use. That's why such an option will appear soon, but people mostly do not want to leave Kherson. They say, we spent 8 months of occupation here. We lived with Russians. We survived the Russian occupation. So the difficulties we're facing now is nothing compared to the fact that we got back home, that we got back under control of Ukrainian army, that we got back under the Ukrainian flag. So everything will be sorted out and will stay in our dwellings. The left bank of Kherson region, Kakhovka, Nova Kakhovka, Oleshki, Skadovsk. What's going on there at this moment? Do you know what's the situation there? The territories along the left bank of the Dnieper turned to military zone. They announced forced evacuation there, but again, people in their vast majority stayed there. Nobody wanted to leave, and they continued to stay there. Only those who were living just close to the bank of the Dnipro were forcibly evicted. The enemy installed fortifications there, including second and third line of defense, digging into the fields. So in fact, they turned this 20-kilometer zone from the bank of Dnipro into a military zone. Now there are mostly only military material and machinery. The humanitarian situation is difficult. The occupants, just like in the right bank of Dnipro, they pillage the areas, they pillage valuables from museums. We had reports of occupiers to steal all the museum exhibits from Kakhovka Museum. There were exhibits related to Cossack history, which they stole from Kakhovka, and they were related to the Tavria part of Ukraine. The occupiers also pillaged the utility transport and all the buses, even those belonging to private companies, private businesses in both Kakhovka and Nova Kakhovka. So basically everything is stolen, just like it was stolen in Kherson. But the presence of occupiers in those towns is not so significant, but they are fortified there. So it's basically a military zone. Now, dear colleagues, your questions, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for your interesting remarks. My name is Lorenzo Cremonesi from Corriere della Sera from Milano, Italia. Sir, I have some question because Kherson is really at the center of the action at the moment. So I will ask you one by one. First of all, can you tell us how, more or less, how many people you evaluate are in Kherson? What do they represent comparing to the situation before the war?
There were 320,000 people in Kherson before the war, and under different estimate now it's about 80,000 people who remained in Kherson at the moment of the occupation. Now people are leaving, some minor fraction of the people are leaving Kherson because the utility conditions are quite difficult, as I just mentioned. However, there are some people who are coming back to Kherson, so this figure is around 80,000 people in Kherson as of now. Another question?
Thank you very much. Second question. It's like you are sending two opposite messages. The first one is, don't worry, situation is improving, the train is reopening, we are slowly reopening the different facilities, energy, water. We are trying to, to present a situation which is slowly normalizing. On the other side, Vereshchuk said, whoever wants can leave, we cannot really sustain you. So what is your policy? Are you suggesting what is better for the people, to stay or to leave? I don't understand what is your policy. Thank you.
Well, the advice to the city is to evacuate if they can, due to security reasons, due to utility situation, but there is a significant part of Kherson inhabitants who categorically refuse to leave. As I mentioned, the people say that we survived Russian occupiers here, so now we will survive all the difficulties. And in view of the fact that the majority of the people, they do not want to leave Kherson, we have to do absolutely everything to provide them with the normal living conditions, and this number of people is very substantial. But again, some part of the people is leaving, but some people are coming back, even no matter the fact that we say that maybe it's not so comfortable to come back to Kherson for the time being. And these people who are in Kherson and who are coming back, they need normal utility conditions, normal living conditions, and we have to provide them at any cost. More questions, dear colleagues? Irina Momchur, Ukrinform, can you please tell us, there was information that Russians withdraw part of their troops from Kherson area and they move it to the Zaporizhia and Donetsk areas. So the question is it true that the presence of the Russian troops become less, or are those airborne are being replaced with just another troops and other units, and the number of the Russian military remains the same? In the left bank of Dnipro, we see the increase in number of those mobilized ones, and the fractions of mobilized who were located in the Arabatska spit, they are being moved to the left bank of the Dnipro River, and we have reports that the number of military decreases, and in their majority they are the mobilized ones, because those mobilized ones who left the Arabatska spit, there is a replenishment of the troops in Arabatska spit, and all those sanatoriums where they were deployed, they are being refilled with the new units from number of those who were located in the right bank of Dnipro. So they were moved into the depth of Kherson region, closer to Melitopol, to that area. Along the bank, if we're talking about the 15-kilometer zone where the occupiers installed fortifications, there are observation posts of the occupiers. Yes, we see the decrease in personnel, but there is a reinforcement in the distance of 50 to 60 kilometers from the banks of Dnipro in the territory of Kherson region. So we can say that generally the number of Russians decreased, and the most capable units are, so to say, a little bit in the depth of Kherson region. Any more questions, friends?
You're in Newsweek magazine. You mentioned that as early as next week, some electricity and water services could be restored, and that's great. But what is a reasonable timeline as to when electricity, water, communications will be restored on a level which allows for the 80,000 people in Kherson to live a more or less normal life without the need for generators, without the need for other types of interventions? When will these services be restored? When is a reasonable timeline as to when these services will be restored on a more or less normal level?
Well, we would not be able to reestablish the power and water supply in full within a week, but what the specialists, the technicians say, that some certain districts of the city of Kherson will be reconnected within a week, but to reconnect the city in full is still impossible because the destruction of critical infrastructure are heavy and are on a big scale. That's why they mentioned that the first reconnection of electric supply will be within a week. This is the task the repair brigades are facing. We understand that the electric supply will be reestablished from Mykolaiv region, where the specialists work, and also from direction of Berislav, where the works are in progress with the help of Kherson and Odessa Oblast technicians. So the works are in progress 24/7. As to the water supply, it's sort of derivative from power supply. But again, with the water, we have to understand that it will be a little bit later, because again, the water supply infrastructure is heavily damaged as well. Obviously, it will not re-emerge in a week, as I say. That will be just the first attempts of water supply, but to provide Kherson with power supply and water supply, we will need probably a month. Mr. Serhii, and the last question as to Kakhovska hydraulic power plant. What's the situation there? Who's in control of it? Well, we had reports of occupiers controlling it, and in the adjacent areas, the adjacent areas are controlled by the Ukrainian armed forces. The dam was blown up by the occupiers after their withdrawal to the left bank, and the generation machinery is being controlled by the occupiers, and the collaborationist Governor Saldo reported that Kakhovska hydraulic power plant is disconnected from power generation, so the generation is controlled by the occupiers. Meanwhile, the dam, the so-called gray zone, is a non-transit, non-passage area. Another question, maybe the last one for sure.
Try to be the last. Sir, can you give us an idea how many collaborators have been captured in the area? And secondly, you said that in the last 3 days, as we know, the Russian resumed bombing. Is it increasing? Can you give us an idea how intense is this bombing? And of course, this can be a major problem for the reconstruction, isn't it? Thank you.
Yes, the bombardment of Kherson and the adjacent areas started 3 days ago, and yes, we can observe the increase of intensity, because last night was the night of very intense shellings. Regarding the collaborationists, we still don't have the official figure of the captured collaborationists. It's the security service of Ukraine who takes care of it, and shortly we will know some figures. But there is a chat bot where people can contact security service, because meanwhile we were in Kherson communicating with the people. They wanted to report the people who cooperated with the enemy, those who live by our sides. We will file reports, we will provide evidences, because it was one of the significant questions. People were coming to us. So we established this chatbot. It's not for reports, it's just for filing cases, filing applications of the crimes, the descriptions. So every collaborationist will be brought liable, but there is still no figure as to the number. Mr. Serhii, thank you for joining us. I will remind you we had Serhii Khlan with us. Our next briefing will be at 14:30. Visiting us will be Yuri Ignat, the spokesperson of the Air Force of Ukraine, and we will talk about the situation in our skies. Please stay with us, trust in our armed forces, and let's work for our victory. Glory to Ukraine.